It's like, you're scrolling on your phone, just trying to keep up with everything that's going on, but it feels like you're drowning in information. And seriously, figuring out what's real and what's not, it can be a total headache. That's why we do these deep dives, to kind of like cut through all the noise and get a clearer view?
Yeah, exactly. It's about giving you that, like, shortcut to understanding these complex topics. We go straight to the source,
Well,
the actual research, so you don't have to, no spin, just like straight to the good stuff.
and today we're diving into something pretty important, something that's super relevant right now.
Hmm.
Disinformation in Portugal. We'll be taking a special look at its connection to the political party, Chega.
Our main source material today comes from the European Digital Media Observatory, EDMO, and their Iberian hub, IBERIFIER. EDMO is an amazing resource, by the way. Like, it's this huge network of fact-checkers, media literacy experts, and researchers all across Europe. They're based at the European University Institute in Florence, which is like a pretty big deal. Just shows their dedication to independent and thorough analysis.
Yeah, that's a really strong foundation for sure. And you mentioned IBERIFIER. They're the ones focusing specifically on Spain and Portugal, right? What's their main mission?
They're all about getting into the, like, nitty-gritty of the digital media environment in Iberia. Identifying the main sources of information disorders, as they call them, and trying to understand how all of that works.
Makes sense. So who are the key players involved in IBERIFIER?
Oh, there are some big names. You've got Agência Lusa, the national news agency. Then there's the Association for Media Literacy and Journalism, ALPMJ. Also ISCT, the University Institute of Lisbon, and of course Polígrafo, which a lot of people probably know as a leading fact-checking organization in Portugal. It's a really cool collaboration with a ton of local expertise.
So it sounds like our mission for this deep dive has two parts. First, we need to grasp the general trends in disinformation that IBERIFIER has identified in Portugal. Then we're going to zero in on their findings about Chega. We want to break it all down for you nice and clear without completely overloading you with information. So, what are some of the big overarching trends in disinformation that IBERIFIER has found in Portugal? What are the main themes they're seeing?
One of the really interesting things is that the main focus of disinformation campaigns in Portugal seems to be a bit different from what you see in some other European countries. While, immigration is a big deal elsewhere, IBERIFIER found that corruption is a huge theme in Portuguese disinformation.
Corruption, huh? That is a fascinating contrast. So what does that actually look like? Give me an example. What kind of disinformation are we talking about?
It's a lot of false claims spreading on social media, especially Facebook. They'll use manipulated data or misleading rankings to try and make Portugal's corruption levels seem way worse than they are. It seems like whoever is spreading this stuff is trying to tap into, anxieties that already exist around corruption.
Yeah, exploiting those existing fears. Makes sense. What other general trends have they noticed? What else is shaping the disinformation landscape in Portugal?
Well, as you might expect, COVID-19 disinformation was a massive problem. IBERIFIER found over 68,000 false posts about the pandemic on Facebook, and that was just in a 4-month period in 2020. Polígrafo also did over 1,000 fact checks related to COVID-19 between February 2020 and July 2022. Just shows you how much misinformation was flying around.
Wow, that's a lot. Really shows how quickly and widely misinformation can spread when there's a crisis going on. Okay, any other major trends they've identified?
Yeah, there's a definite pattern of international disinformation getting amplified within the Portuguese online community. And social media is a huge factor in spreading that across borders. Also, while corruption was the biggest thing at first, IBERIFIER has seen more and more disinformation targeting immigrants and refugees, often with a pretty xenophobic angle. During their monitoring of the European elections, they found that immigration was actually the topic that had the biggest reach when it came to disinformation. So, the narratives are expanding, and that's definitely a concern.
So it's not just limited to one issue. When we talk about platforms, where is all of this disinformation happening? Where are the fact checkers focusing their energy?
Facebook seems to be the main culprit. Fact checkers in Portugal say they find the most content that needs verifying on Facebook. But, it's not just Facebook. Other platforms like Twitter, X now, and WhatsApp are also part of the problem, especially in the broader Iberian context. So it's not a one-platform issue.
It's multi-platform, yeah. So Portugal has a kind of complicated relationship with news and information, right? There was some interesting data about trust.
Right. Interestingly, 58% of people who get their news in Portugal say they trust the news, which is higher than in some other southern European countries.
That's good, right? A solid starting point. But didn't we also see something about awareness of online risks?
Yeah, despite that trust in the news, concern about online disinformation is even higher in Portugal, like around 70%. In Spain, it's around 64%. It suggests that people are aware of the dangers of online misinformation, even if they still trust the traditional sources.
Interesting. So there's trust in the news, but also a big awareness of online risks. Okay, well, since we're talking about concern about online misinformation, let's get into how all of this intersects with Chega, the political party. What have EDMO and IBERIFIER found out about that?
Their analysis shows a pretty worrying link between Chega and the spread of disinformation. There's some specific cases and studies that really highlight this connection.
Okay, let's get into those examples. What are some of the cases that connect Chega to disinformation?
EDMO did a fact-checking brief that focused on a big national disinformation story. It was about an alleged plan by intelligence services to, help Chega's leader in the presidential election. This shows that disinformation directly involving the party has become a major issue, something people are paying attention to.
That's a pretty serious accusation. What else have they found?
IBERIFIER was monitoring the European elections, and they found that Chega had almost twice as many social media interactions as the other parties. Now, a lot of engagement doesn't automatically equal disinformation, but it creates an environment where those narratives, including potentially false ones, can spread really fast.
Right, and it's not just about the numbers. There have been direct accusations and analyses of specific cases of misinformation too, right?
Absolutely. Polígrafo, which is a well-respected fact-checking organization, actually gave their National Lie of the Year award in 2022 to André Ventura, Chega's leader. And get this, that same year, Polígrafo documented about 50 instances of him spreading false or inaccurate information. That's a huge amount of documented misinformation from one political leader.
50 in 1 year, yikes. That definitely says something.
And there's more. The IPI, the International Press Institute, has reported on André Ventura's constant use of anti-media rhetoric. He's even called the press the enemy of the people. That kind of talk can really damage public trust in reliable sources and make people more likely to fall for disinformation.
Yeah, that tactic of undermining trust in the media, we see that a lot in different contexts.
Exactly. And it's not just talk. There have been cases of social media accounts linked to Chega pretending to be real news outlets to spread disinformation. It's super sneaky because they're trying to use the trust people have in legitimate news sources to their advantage.
That's just like straight up deceptive. And unfortunately, it gets even worse, doesn't it?
Sadly, yes. In November 2024, 2 Chega leaders were accused of some pretty serious stuff, aggravated threats and attacks on freedom of information. It was after an investigation into online harassment of a journalist who was reporting on the rise of the far right in Portugal and Europe. This is a really big deal because it directly impacts freedom of the press.
Wow, that's really concerning. So taking all of that together, the alleged intelligence plot, the huge social media engagement, the lie of the year, the anti-media rhetoric, the fake news outlets, and the threats against journalists, it's not a good look. According to these studies, what kinds of disinformation are most common with Chega? What are the usual narratives?
The analysis points to a lot of populist and anti-system rhetoric in the disinformation associated with Chega. This fits in with their general political stance. And sometimes the language is informal, even offensive, which unfortunately can be effective with certain groups of people.
What do you think is the reason behind all of this? Why would they spread or be linked to disinformation?
There could be a few reasons. They might be trying to get political support by appealing to certain complaints or fears among voters. Another possibility is that they're trying to polarize the electorate, creating a strong us versus them situation that gets their base fired up. And like we said before, discrediting the media and political opponents is a way to control the narrative, basically trying to manipulate the information landscape to their advantage.
That's what it sounds like, strategically manipulating the information. Okay, but beyond these examples, what do we actually know about how far this disinformation reaches and what impact it has? How many people are seeing it, and is it actually changing minds?
Unfortunately, the sources don't give us exact numbers on the reach and direct impact. But remember, Chega had almost double the social media interactions compared to other parties during the European elections. That suggests that their message is reaching a lot of people. To understand the real impact on public opinion and voting behavior, we need more in-depth research. It's one thing for the information to be out there, it's another to actually measure how much it influences people.
That makes sense. So with all of this going on, what are fact-checking organizations doing in Portugal? Are they fighting back against this wave of disinformation?
Oh, they're absolutely crucial right now. Polígrafo, as we've mentioned a few times, is a pioneer. They were the first fact-checking newspaper in Portugal, and they're a member of the IFCN, the International Fact-Checking Network, which sets the standards for fact-checking worldwide. Observatório, another big news outlet, also has a fact-check section, and they're IFCN members too. These organizations are doing really important work.
So there are people out there trying to debunk these false claims. Can you give us some specific examples of fact checks targeting Chega or related to the party?
Well, there's the National Lie of the Year award that Polígrafo gave to Andre Ventura, which was a very public way of holding him accountable. IBERIFIER has analyzed disinformation around different events. They don't always explicitly mention Chega's involvement, but since they focus on the Portuguese information ecosystem, their work often overlaps with narratives that political actors are pushing. Like, they looked into disinformation around the Dane weather event, for example. And there was a fact check on a claim made by a Chega Azores politician about an illegal Chinese fishing fleet. These show the variety of topics that fact-checkers are examining.
They're on top of things. But are fact checks always effective? What kind of challenges do they face?
That's a really important question. One study found that about half of the Portuguese citizens surveyed were skeptical about how impartial and rigorous fact-checkers are. That lack of trust can really make things harder for them, even when their work is solid. And, Portuguese fact-checkers tend to focus more on what's said in traditional political debates rather than what's going around on social media. That could be a big problem because, remember, Chega has a huge online presence. If a lot of the disinformation is happening online without being fact-checked, then there's a gap there.
So even though fact checkers are working hard, public skepticism and the focus on traditional media could be limiting their effectiveness, especially with a party like Chega that seems to be really good at using online strategies. Okay, big picture now. What are the broader implications of a political party being linked to disinformation? What does it mean for Portugal's democracy and society in the long run?
The potential consequences are actually pretty serious. Disinformation can lead to more political polarization, making it way harder for people with different views to find common ground. It can also erode trust in important democratic institutions like the media, elections, and even the government. And there's a real risk that it could influence election outcomes if enough people believe the misinformation. The kind of anti-media rhetoric we've seen can also undermine the role of a free press, which is vital for holding those in power accountable. And finally, disinformation can make existing social divisions worse, fueling prejudice and making it harder for society to be cohesive. So it's a problem that can really affect the entire democratic system.
It's a pretty scary thought, the damage it could do in the long run. Based on all this, what are some things that different stakeholders could do to address this issue? What actions could be effective?
There are several important things to consider. For policymakers, strengthening the laws around online disinformation while still protecting free speech is crucial. They also need to invest in making sure media and fact-checking organizations can operate independently and sustainably. Promoting digital literacy and critical thinking skills through education is also really important. It can help people become more discerning consumers of information. And finally, online platforms need to be more transparent about their content moderation policies and how they handle political advertising.
What about media organizations? What can they do?
Media organizations should definitely work more closely with fact-checkers and researchers to make sure their reporting is accurate. They should also come up with new and engaging ways to present fact checks, especially on social media where disinformation spreads so quickly. That way, they can reach a wider audience. It's also essential for them to actively push back against anti-media rhetoric and build trust with the public through transparent and ethical journalism.
And what about the social media platforms themselves? What role should they be playing?
Social media platforms have a huge responsibility here. They need to keep improving their algorithms to detect and flag disinformation, all while respecting people's rights. They also need to be way more open about their content moderation policies and how they actually apply them. And like we've talked about, working more closely with fact-checkers and researchers is crucial to effectively tackling disinformation.
It's definitely a complex problem that needs a multi-pronged solution involving everyone. What about civil society organizations and researchers? What can they do?
Civil society organizations are in a good position to create media literacy initiatives at the community level. That can empower people with the skills to navigate the online information world. Promoting healthy dialogue and understanding between different political perspectives can also help fight the polarization that disinformation creates. And of course, supporting independent journalism and fact-checking is essential. For researchers, it's super important to conduct long-term studies to understand the lasting impact of disinformation, especially from groups like Chega. Analyzing how effective different counter-disinformation strategies are in Portugal, and looking into how algorithms contribute to the spread of politically motivated disinformation are also crucial areas of study.
So, to sum it all up, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive into the EDMO and IBERIFIER studies on Chega and disinformation in Portugal? What's the most important thing for our listeners to keep in mind?
The research shows a clear and concerning pattern between the Chega party in Portugal and the spread of disinformation. Specific examples, like the Lie of the Year award given to their leader by Polígrafo and Chega's massive social media presence during the European elections, strongly suggest a connection. And, the anti-media rhetoric used by key people in the party and the fact that accounts linked to Chega have pretended to be legitimate news sources to spread false information just makes the issue even more complex and potentially dangerous for the information environment in Portugal.
And, it's crucial to remember that even though trust in traditional news sources is fairly high in Portugal compared to other places, there's still a huge amount of disinformation circulating online, and people are skeptical of fact checkers. These are big challenges for maintaining a healthy information environment for everyone.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It requires constant vigilance, critical thinking from all citizens, and a coordinated effort from everyone involved to understand the ever-changing world of political disinformation in Portugal and create effective strategies that protect democratic processes and social cohesion in the digital age.
Yeah, it really makes you think twice about what you see online, doesn't it? It makes you wonder about the responsibility we all have in this digital world. How do we as individuals separate truth from lies, especially when it comes to political information and movements? And not just in Portugal, but globally. That's something to think about even after this deep dive is over.